I sat at the kitchen table with my arm wrapped tight in white bandages. The smell of fresh bread filled the room, but I couldn't reach it. My daughter Emma looked at me and said softly, "Robert wanted you to learn." Robert, my son-in-law, laughed from across the room. That old lady thought she could boss us around, but I showed her different. I just smiled quietly. 10 minutes later, someone knocked on the door. When Robert opened it, he learned who was really in charge. Friends, before I tell you this story, I want to ask something small. If you like what you hear, please click subscribe and the like button. Also, tell us in the comments what country you're from. It makes me so happy to see how many people listen to us. Enjoy the story. The smell of warm soup was everywhere in my small kitchen. For most people, this smell means home and love. But for me, sitting in my wooden chair with my hurt arm, it only reminded me I couldn't help myself. I looked down at my bowl. It was white and pretty, with little flowers painted on the sides. My husband and I bought these bowls many years ago when we visited the big city. The bowl was empty. Nothing in it at all. My right arm, the one I use for everything, was wrapped up and hurt so much. It felt heavy like a rock tied to my body. Every time my heart beat, pain went up and down my arm. The bone inside was broken. I knew it was broken even before the doctor told me. I heard the snap when Robert pushed me hard against the wall. "Everyone, please eat." Robert's voice was loud and bossy. "The soup today is so good. Emma made it perfect." Robert sat in the big chair at the end of the table. That was where my husband used to sit before he died. Robert's shirt was dirty, and his face was red and sweaty. He ate fast, barely chewing, just pushing food into his mouth. Bits of food fell on his shirt. He wiped his mouth with his hand, not even using a napkin. Around the table sat 3 people Robert worked with. They worked at the city office with him. They ate quietly, looking only at their plates. They could feel something was wrong. They saw me, an old lady with gray hair and a hurt arm, sitting with no food. But they were scared of Robert. He was their boss. He decided if they got paid extra or got days off. I tried to move my left hand. My fingers moved, but I couldn't reach the soup pot. It was too far away. "Robert," one man at the table whispered. His name was Tom and he wore glasses. "Maybe we should give Mrs. Johnson some soup." "Mind your own business, Tom," Robert said loudly, pouring himself more water. "Mrs. Johnson is on a special diet today. Not eating is good for thinking, right, Grandma?" He looked at me with mean eyes. There was no sorry in them, only happiness. Happy that he had won. "Grandma only has herself to blame," Emma said quietly. My daughter sat next to her husband. She wore a gray dress that made her look tired and sick. Emma cut her salad into tiny pieces, not looking at me. "She's getting old now," Robert continued, talking to his work friends like he was telling a funny joke. "She can't move right anymore. She gets confused. Yesterday she tried to climb on a chair to reach the high shelf. Can you believe that?" I told her. "What are you doing, old woman?" But she wouldn't listen, so she fell down. Lucky she didn't break her neck. He laughed a rough, mean laugh. The people at the table smiled a little, but their smiles looked fake and uncomfortable. I looked at my daughter. For 30 years I worked as a teacher. I taught children how to read and write. I knew how to help people learn. But I couldn't remember when I lost my daughter. When did she change into this scared, quiet person who listened to everything her mean husband said? "It was an accident," Emma said softly, finally looking at me. I could see fear in her eyes. Not fear for me, fear for herself. "But it was a lesson you needed, Mama. You need to listen to the man of the house. You're not at school anymore. You don't tell people what to do." My stomach hurt from being so hungry. I hadn't eaten anything for a whole day. Not since Robert got angry and pushed me. The pain in my broken arm kept going and going, like a drum beating over and over. In the corner of the room, the old clock on the wall kept ticking. Tick-tock, tick-tock. That clock belonged to my father. It always told the right time. Robert raised his glass of water. "Here's to respect," he said. "In this house there must be rules. The person who pays for everything is the boss. The person who lives here for free should sit quiet and not cause trouble. He drank his water, made a loud sound, and ate more food. I felt something cold starting inside me, deep in my chest. Pushed away the hurt feelings. This was a feeling I knew well. The same calm, cold feeling I got when I stood in front of my classroom, ready to teach an important lesson. Being upset and angry doesn't help. You need to be calm and think clearly. I didn't cry. Crying is for people who want others to feel sorry for them. I didn't want that. I knew better. I looked at the clock on the wall. The hands moved forward, never stopping. The time was 7:59 in the evening. The room was quiet except for Robert eating. He felt like he had won. He thought he had beaten me just like he broke my arm. He thought my hurt arm meant I had lost. I sat up as straight as I could, even though it hurt, and took a deep breath. "Robert," I said. My voice was quiet but clear. Cut through the air in the room like a knife cutting paper. Robert stopped with his spoon halfway to his mouth. The people eating stopped chewing. Even Emma became very still. "What do you want?" he said without turning around. "You're sitting in my husband's chair," I said, looking at the back of his head. "And I think you have about 1 minute left to enjoy it." Robert turned slowly. His face was red, and his mouth twisted into an angry look. "What?" he asked, his voice full of threat. "Are you trying to scare me, old lady? Going to hit me with your hurt arm?" He laughed. It was a loud, ugly sound that bounced off the walls. "Oh, I'm so scared," he said to his work friends. "Look, she's counting time. Go ahead, count. 59 seconds. 58. I didn't answer. I just watched the second hand on the clock. It moved slowly toward the top. I knew something Robert didn't know. I knew that the plan I had made was working perfectly, just like that clock. Robert didn't know that my quietness wasn't giving up. It was waiting. The second hand moved around the clock and touched the top number. Right then, the pain in my arm got stronger, like it was taking me back in time to exactly 1 day ago. That night, the air in this house didn't smell like soup. It smelled sour and bad. Robert was walking around the living room, stumbling and bumping into things. He looked like a scared animal. His eyes moved fast and his hands shook. "I need money, you old witch," he screamed. Spit flew from his mouth. "Do you understand how much trouble I'm in? This isn't a game. These are dangerous people." I stood in the doorway, blocking his way. "This is my husband's house," I said calmly. "And as long as I'm alive, you will not sell it to pay for your mistakes." That was my mistake. Not saying no. No, my mistake was thinking the person in front of me was still a good person. Right then, the fear in Robert took over completely. He ran at me. I saw his eyes. They looked wild and crazy. He hit me so suddenly and so hard. He didn't just push me. He threw me with all his strength like I was garbage. I flew backward. My right arm went up to protect my face from hitting the wall. Crack. I would know that sound anywhere. The terrible sound of bone breaking. Right then, pain exploded in my arm. I felt sick to my stomach. I slid down the wall onto the floor, holding my bent arm close to my chest. Emma stood in the hall. She saw everything. She saw him run. She saw him push. She heard the bone break. But she didn't run to help me. She just put her hands on her face and whispered, "Mama, why do you make him angry? Just agree to what he wants." Robert stood over me, breathing hard. "See," he said through his teeth. "This is your fault. You fell, you stupid old fool." He grabbed the phone from the table and ripped the cord out of the wall. Then he took my cell phone from my pocket. "No calling anyone," he said angrily. "You sit here and think. Tomorrow a man is coming to do the papers. If you don't sign nicely, I'm going to tell people you're crazy. I'll say you're dangerous. I know people everywhere. You know that." He slammed the bedroom door and locked it with a key. I was alone in the dark on the floor with my arm on fire with pain. But Robert, with all his mean plans, was just a small, stupid man. He knew how to steal and cheat at his city job, but he knew nothing about people like me. And he forgot who I was before I became an old woman. I'm a teacher. Panic is something a teacher cannot afford. Fighting through the pain that made everything look blurry, I crawled to the old closet. With my left hand, I felt around on the bottom for my old bag. My emergency bag. It didn't have teaching books anymore, but it had things that could save me in different ways. Medicine for pain, and an old phone that I kept charged once a month, just in case. I gave myself the medicine. With shaking fingers, I put the battery in the phone. The screen lit up with a green light. There was service. I could make a call. Who should I call? The police. No use. The police chief was friends with Robert. They played cards every weekend. My call would just get stopped, and Robert would get even meaner. I needed someone bigger than Robert. Someone who didn't care about the people Robert knew. Closed my eyes. My memory gave me a phone number I hadn't used in 20 years. I never wrote that number down. Numbers like this you keep only in your head. Ring. Second ring. Third ring. Hello, a man's voice answered. The voice was calm, deep, and strong. A voice that didn't waste time. It's Margaret, I said. My voice shook, not from fear but from pain. I need help. There was quiet on the phone. It lasted only a second, but it felt like forever. Where are you? He asked. Not how are you. Not it's been so long. Just ready to help right away. Like a soldier. I told him my address. Wait there, he said. A loud ring at the door pulled me back from my memories. I was back in the dining room. Clock chimed 8 times. The doorbell rang long and loud. It was not a normal ring. It was demanding and strong. Made the dishes rattle. Robert jumped but then smiled big. He wiped his mouth and stood up from his chair, walking a bit side to side. There, he said loudly to his work friends. See. Right on time. Professional, right, Mrs. Johnson? He looked down at me. His eyes shined with greed. It's the lawyer, he explained, winking at his friends. I called him to come at exactly 8. We'll just sign some papers, just family stuff, and then we'll keep eating. Emma let out a big breath of relief and reached for her drink. Thank goodness, she said quietly. Mama, please just sign. Don't make a scene. I didn't say anything. I just held the arm of my chair tighter with my left hand. The pain medicine from yesterday was gone, but now my body was making its own medicine. I felt alert and ready. Robert, walking unsteadily and humming a tune, walked to the front door. I heard his heavy footsteps going down the hall. Heard the lock click. Come in, my friend. His voice, full of fake friendliness, rang out. We've been waiting. I hope you brought the papers. We have a stubborn old lady, but we'll. Robert's voice cut off suddenly. Not faded away. It stopped like someone grabbed his throat. The dining room became silent. The work friends looked at each other. Emma froze with her glass at her lips. I looked at the empty doorway to the hall. I knew what was about to happen. Robert thought he was opening the door for his helper. A bad lawyer who would help him steal from me. He was so sure he was in control. So sure he had power over an old woman who supposedly couldn't think right. But he opened the wrong door. He didn't open it for a lawyer. He opened it for his punishment. Instead of a greeting, deadly silence filled the hall. It was so thick, it felt like all the air had been sucked out of the house. Then I heard a sound that made my heart beat a little faster. The heavy, steady sound of boots on the floor. These were not the soft steps of a lawyer. This was the walk of power. I couldn't see what was happening at the door, but I heard Robert's breathing catch. It turned into a wheezing sound. Mayor Thompson. My son-in-law's voice, which had been so loud a minute ago, now sounded thin and scared like a little boy getting in trouble. Mayor Thompson. Shock filled the room. The work friends froze with forks in their hands. The woman dropped food on the tablecloth but didn't notice. The name Robert just said was too big for our little dining room. It was the name of a man whose picture hung in their offices. A man who decided important things for the whole town with just his signature. What an honor! Robert babbled in the hall. I heard him backing away. We weren't ready. If I had known you would visit, "It's just a family dinner, Mayor Thompson. We're just—" Two shapes appeared in the dining room doorway. They weren't guests. They were giants. Two huge men in dark suits with serious faces. They silently stood on each side of the entrance, looking around the room with cold eyes that saw everything. Robert rushed into the room, walking backward and bowing to someone I couldn't see yet in the hall. His face was the color of sour milk. "Please, please come in," he said nervously, bumping into chairs. "Emma, stand up. Everyone stand. It's the mayor himself." And then he walked into the room. James Thompson had gotten older in the past 20 years. His hair was completely white now, and the lines around his eyes were deeper, like marks left by time and hard work. But his eyes were the same. Strong, smart, seeing everything. He wore a perfect dark suit that fit him just right, showing his wide shoulders. But the strangest thing was not how he looked. The strangest thing was what he carried in his hands. In his big hands, used to signing important papers and making big decisions, he carefully held a small bunch of yellow flowers. Bright yellow against his dark suit. Robert, shaking all over, tried to block his path, putting out his sweaty hand for a handshake. "Mayor Thompson, let me introduce myself. I'm Robert Chen, Assistant Director at City Planning." The mayor walked right past him. He didn't even slow down. He simply didn't see Robert, like he wasn't even there. Like Robert was a coat rack or empty air. Robert was left standing with his hand out, trying to breathe like a fish out of water. James's eyes were fixed on me. He walked straight to my chair at the end of the table. He didn't look at Emma, who was frozen in fear. He didn't look at the scared work friends. All you could hear was his breathing and the floor creaking under his weight. He reached the table and stopped. His eyes fell on the nice meal still sitting there. The soup, the salads, the fancy dishes, the pitcher of water. Then he looked at my plate. At its empty whiteness. Slowly, very slowly. His eyes moved to my right arm. To the rough, quickly wrapped bandages, from under which my swollen purple fingers stuck out. I saw his jaw tighten so hard that the muscles in his face bulged. The blood left his face, making him look frighteningly pale. It wasn't just anger. It was quiet, scary rage. Like a big wave that hasn't hit the beach yet but is rising high above the water. The room became so quiet I could hear the clock ticking. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Mayor James Thompson, the man feared by rich people and criminals, did something none of the people there could have expected. He dropped to one knee right on the floor next to my chair. His expensive suit touched the floor, but he didn't care. He was now at the same height as me, looking right into my eyes. He placed the bunch of yellow flowers on the table next to my empty plate. Then carefully, like he was afraid to hurt me with his touch, he covered my good hand with his warm, big hand. His eyes, usually cold and strong, now looked at me with such pain and kindness that I could barely breathe. He ignored everyone else. Robert, who was leaning against the wall to keep from falling. Emma, who had her head down. The work friends. For him in this room there was only me. "Mrs. Johnson," he said quietly, and the dishes on the table shook from his deep voice. He looked at my empty plate, then back into my eyes. "You told me you fell," he continued, almost whispering. And in that whisper there was more threat to everyone around us than in any shout. "But you didn't tell me you weren't eating." Mayor Thompson slowly stood up from his knee. He didn't wait for me to answer. He didn't need words to understand what was obvious. The shake in my fingers. The way my lips looked dry. That embarrassing hunger that was impossible to hide. He turned to the table. His movements were smooth but held a weight that made everyone's throats go dry. He walked to the big chair at the end of the table, the one Robert had been sitting in, and put his hand on the back. He didn't even look at my son-in-law. He just stood there and waited. Robert staggered, stepping back like he'd been burned. He gave up the seat so fast he almost knocked over Emma's chair. His eyes showed animal fear. He had just been kicked out of the throne he thought was his by right of strength. The mayor sat down. The chair didn't make a sound under him. He took the seat so naturally, like he'd sat there his whole life. He picked up a cloth napkin, shook it out, and carefully spread it over his lap. Then his eyes fell on the silverware Robert had left on the tablecloth. Greasy and dirty. James Thompson looked at them with disgust and pushed them aside with his little finger. One of the big men in suits, like a shadow, appeared next to him and placed a clean set of silverware before the mayor. From somewhere in his suit, he pulled out a perfect kit. Shiny steel. The silence in the room was so deep you could hear a fly buzzing against the window. Robert's work friends sat with their heads down, trying to disappear. They understood they were seeing something they should probably forget if they wanted to keep their jobs. James reached for the soup pot easily. With one hand, he pulled the heavy pot toward himself. He picked up a spoon. I watched his hands. 30 years ago, those hands belonged to a scared young man who had been brought to my classroom. Back then they shook. Now they were solid as stone. He scooped some soup. He didn't rush like Robert, but moved carefully and gently. Then he began to put the soup into a clean bowl. Slowly, neatly. He prepared the food the way you do for small children or very sick people. No one dared make a sound. Robert stood behind the mayor, shifting his feet. Sweat rolled down his face and soaked his shirt. Emma sat white as paper, pulling at the edge of the tablecloth. James finished preparing the bowl. He took the spoon and turned to me. There was no pity in his eyes that would have embarrassed me. There was respect. Deep respect, like you show someone you look up to. He brought the spoon to my lips. "Please, Mrs. Johnson," he said quietly. My cheeks turned red. To be fed by hand in front of people who had been laughing at me an hour ago could have felt shameful. But there was so much dignity in James's gesture that the shame went away. I opened my mouth and took the food. The taste of warm soup, with vegetables and salt and herbs, hit my taste buds. My stomach tightened with thankfulness. I chewed and swallowed, feeling warmth spread through my body, giving me back my strength. James waited patiently. He gave me another spoonful and another. Only when I had eaten enough to satisfy the worst hunger did he put the spoon down. He wiped his hands with a napkin and, without turning, spoke into the silence of the room. "Who?" One word, but it sounded like a judge's hammer hitting wood. "Which person here?" The mayor's voice was level and conversational, like he was asking about the weather. "Is the one who taught Mrs. Johnson her lesson?" Robert twitched. He laughed nervously, a wet, shaky sound. "Oh, Mayor Thompson, come on," he stammered, trying to sound confident, but his voice cracked. "What lesson?" That was just words. Family talk, you know. Nothing serious. He took a step forward, trying to get into the mayor's view, but one of the big men silently blocked his path with his shoulder. "Mrs. Johnson has, well, you understand, she's old." Marcus tapped his finger against his head. A gesture that made me feel sick. "She gets mixed up. Forgets things. Can't balance right. Yesterday she tried to get a cup from the high shelf." He paused, searching for a better lie. "And she tripped over the rug," Robert said quickly, happy he thought of it. "Yes, exactly. She slipped on the rug. Poor thing. We were so worried. We wanted to call the doctor right away, but she said no, said it would be fine. We take such good care of her, Mayor Thompson. Such good care. We treat her like a queen. And the bandages. Well, that's just life. Old bones break easy." Pause hung in the room. Robert smiled, wiping his neck, sure his lie sounded believable. After all, it was a normal story. Old lady rug fall. Who would check? I swallowed the last spoonful of soup. The pain in my arm hadn't gone away. But now that my brain had food, my thoughts became crystal clear. I looked at my son-in-law, this small man who thought he was the boss of everything. "Robert," I said. My voice was firm. He jumped, throwing an angry look my way, silently telling me to be quiet. "What, Grandma?" he said through closed teeth, trying to keep the mask of the caring family member. "Do you need more water?" "There is no rug in this house, Robert," I said clearly, saying every word carefully. "We are on smooth floors. There is not a single rug. Even the doormats were taken away to make it easier for me to walk." The silence that followed was deafening. The smile slid off Robert's face like melting ice. He stood frozen with his mouth open, realizing the stupid thing he had just said. In his panic, he had forgotten the layout of his own house, the one he was so desperate to sell. Mayor Thompson stopped moving the glass of water he held. He slowly raised his eyes to Robert. His look darkened, becoming like the barrel of a gun. "No rug," the mayor repeated very quietly. Robert began to stutter. "Well, I meant outside. Or I got confused." Mayor Thompson's stress. "I worry so much about Grandma." The mayor slowly stood up. He was a head taller than Robert. He walked right up to him, getting very close, forcing my son-in-law to press himself against the wall cabinet. "Lying to an official when they're doing their job is against the law, Robert," James said, looking straight into his eyes. "Lying to investigators is a crime." He paused, letting the words sink into Robert's mind. "But lying to the woman who changed my life 30 years ago," the mayor's voice dropped to a whisper that made everyone break out in a cold sweat. "That is unforgivable, Robert. And I don't forgive." He sharply turned away from the shaking son-in-law and looked at me again. "Emma," I said, not giving Robert a chance to recover. "Get me my bag." My daughter jumped at the sound of her name. "Why, Mama?" she squeaked. "Get me the bag. Now." Emma, stumbling, rushed into the hallway and came back with my old worn bag. I nodded toward it to the mayor. "Open the inside pocket, James," I said, calling him by his first name for the first time that evening. "There's something in there that will explain this rug story." James froze. His hand was near my bag, but he didn't open it yet. In that moment, Robert, realizing that staying quiet was making things worse, decided to risk everything. He stood up straighter, puffed out his chest, and tried to put on that bossy look that worked on the people at his city job. "Mayor Thompson, wait." The son-in-law's voice got a shaky but brazen firmness. "Let's be honest with each other. Man to man. Official to official." He took a step forward, ignoring the tensing bodyguard, and spread his hands like he was inviting the mayor into his circle. "I am the Assistant Director of City Planning," Robert said the title like it was something very important. "We're on the same team, Mayor Thompson. We run this city together. You know how it is. Stress, responsibility, pressure. And here." He waved his hand carelessly in my direction, like brushing away crumbs. "Here we're dealing with a family problem. Mrs. Johnson, unfortunately, age is affecting her mind. Her mental state, you understand. Memory problems are terrible." Emma, sensing the change in her husband's tone, immediately joined in. She nodded, and tears, not of real sadness but of fear for herself, appeared in her eyes. "Yes, she attacks us," my daughter cried out, pointing at me with her finger. "You can't imagine, Mayor Thompson, what it's like living with her. She's becoming mean. Yesterday she threw a glass at Robert. We were just protecting ourselves. This arm. I was trying to stop her so she wouldn't hurt herself or us." She cried, smearing her makeup, turning into a messy mask of fake grief. I listened to them and felt a strange emptiness. My own daughter, my child that I carried and raised and loved, stood here and lied about her mother to save her worthless husband. But instead of pain, I felt only cold clarity. Like a teacher watching a student fail a test they should have studied for. James didn't look at them. He looked at me. He waited. He didn't need excuses. He needed the truth. "Emma," I said quietly. The room became so silent you could hear cloth rustling. "Get the paper from the bag. The one you saw this morning but were too scared to touch." Emma froze. Her hand hung in the air. She turned a frightened look to her husband, looking for support, but Robert was too busy trying to disappear. "Do what your mother says." James's voice cracked like a whip. He held out my bag to her, not letting go. With shaking fingers, Emma unzipped it. She felt inside and pulled out a large white envelope made of thick paper. The sound of her pulling it out seemed very loud in the silence. "What is that?" Robert nervously laughed. though sweat rolled down his face. A note from a crazy doctor. Proof she's losing her mind. Give it here. James took the envelope from Emma's weak hands. He didn't tear it open. He carefully slid out what was inside. A clear plastic sheet with a picture on it. An X-ray. He didn't need a special light. James raised the picture high above his head, holding it up to the bright light from the ceiling. The light came through the plastic, showing the white shape of my bones against the dark background. The break was clearly visible. An ugly, jagged line cutting across the bone. Robert snorted, trying to save himself. Well, there you see. She fell just like I said. Normal fall injury. James slowly lowered the picture. Now he looked at Robert not as another official, not even as a man. He looked at him as a target. I taught gym class for 20 years, Robert, the mayor said in a voice that carried the chill of ice. I've seen kids fall from playground equipment, from bikes, from trees. When a person falls, they put their hands out, palms down. The bone breaks at the wrist from hitting the ground. He tapped his finger on the X-ray, right at the break in the middle of the arm. This. James took a step toward Robert, who flinched, pressing himself against the wall, making the cabinet shake. This is a break in the middle of the arm bone. It only happens one way. When a person covers their head with their arm to block a hit from above. From a bat, a stick, or a very heavy fist. Robert opened his mouth but couldn't make a sound. His lie had turned to dust, meeting the brutal facts of violence. It's a defensive break, James stated, throwing the X-ray onto the table, right into the bowl of salad. She didn't fall. She was protecting herself. He sharply turned his head to the left, where his security chief, a tall man with a stone face, stood frozen. Captain, the mayor commanded in a tone that meant business. Call the district attorney. I want a full investigation of the assistant director's activities at city planning. Every contract, every signature, every city dollar for the past 5 years. And start with his personal bank accounts. Yes, sir, the captain replied shortly, pulling out a phone. When do I start? The officer asked. James looked at Robert, who was sliding down the wall, holding his chest. 5 minutes ago. The words 5 minutes ago hung in the air like smoke after lightning. For Robert they meant the end. I saw the realization cut through the fog in his brain. An investigation. A check of bank accounts. This wasn't just losing his job. It was the collapse of everything he had built on lies and stealing. Instead of giving up, he exploded. It was the reaction of a trapped animal whose way out had been blocked. His face swelled with red. Veins on his neck bulged, turning into ugly ropes. You have no right, he yelled, and spit flew onto the table. You can't do this to me. Who do you think you are? You think just because you're the mayor you can do anything. He slammed his fist on the table, making the plates jump. The work friends shrank in their chairs, wishing they could disappear. This is my house, Robert roared, losing all control. My home. I'm the owner here. And her. He pointed a shaking finger at me. She's nobody. She's living on my charity. Feed her. Pay the bills. I put up with her crazy behavior. Have rights. Legal rights. The fear of jail squeezed the last bit of sense out of him. Fear and panic created a dangerous mix. And Robert, forgetting the armed guards, forgetting who stood before him, lunged forward. He saw no one but me, the cause of all his problems. He wanted to reach me, maybe to hit again, to shut me up, to get rid of the witness to his crimes. This is all your fault, you old hag, he shrieked, coming around the corner of the table. Emma, covering her face with her hands, let out a thin, high scream like tires screeching. The bodyguards tensed. I saw the captain's hand slide toward something under his jacket, a practiced, smooth, dangerous motion. But they didn't move forward. They didn't have to. Mayor Thompson simply stood up. He made no sudden moves. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood up to his full height, straightening his wide shoulders in the dark suit. He stood between me and the wild Robert, becoming an unbreakable wall. Such a wave of heavy, crushing force came from him that the air around him seemed to get thicker. Robert ran into that wall and bounced back like hitting stone. He froze half a step from the mayor, breathing hard, making fists, but not daring to raise a hand. James's eyes looked down at him with the icy calm of a judge who has already made his decision and is simply waiting to say it out loud. "Sit down," James said quietly. It wasn't a question. It was a command given to a bad dog. Marcus began to shake all over. All his anger was gone, broken against the stone strength of my guest. He backed away, stumbled over the leg of a chair, and fell heavily onto the floor, right onto the hard wood, grabbing the edge of the tablecloth. A ringing silence filled the room. All you could hear was my son-in-law's gasping breath and Emma's quiet crying. I slowly caught my breath. My heart was beating steadily. Now that the danger of being hurt again had passed, it was time for a different kind of power. The truth. "Your house." "Yes." My voice was quiet, but in that silence, it sounded louder than a shout. Robert lifted his blurry eyes to me. "Yes," he spit out, still holding on to his lies. "Mine legally. Emma is the only child. As soon as you're gone, this will all be ours. I already talked to the real estate people. I need that money." "James." I wasn't looking at my son-in-law. I was looking at the mayor. "Please hand me the blue folder. The one I asked you to bring from the records office." James nodded. He reached out to his assistant, and the man, without question, placed a thin folder with the city's official stamp into his hand. The mayor set it down before me on the table next to my empty bowl. With my left hand I opened the folder. There was only one paper inside. Paper with special marks on it, yellow with age, over 10 years old, but still having the power of law. "Robert," I said, unfolding the paper so he could see the title at the top. "You broke my arm trying to force me to sign papers. You threatened me. You embarrassed me. You wouldn't let me eat. All for this house. You screamed that you would sell it to pay your debts." Paused, letting him hear every word. "But you made one mistake. Stupid mistake. You never checked who really owns this house. You were so sure I was just an old fool holding onto 4 walls that you didn't even bother to look at the official records." Robert strained his neck, trying to read the words on the paper. His eyes got narrow, trying to focus on the letters. "What is it?" he whispered. "It's a deed of donation," I said with a small smile. "Dated 2014. 10 years ago, Robert." I placed my good hand on the paper. "I donated this house to the City Library Foundation in memory of my husband and my career teaching. The agreement has only one rule attached. The right of lifetime residence for citizen Margaret Johnson." Emma stopped crying. She lifted her head, her mouth open in silent shock. "Mama," she whispered, "you gave the house to the library." "Yes," I replied, not taking my eyes off Robert's white face. "This house does not belong to me. And it does not belong to Emma. And least of all, Robert, it never, ever belonged to you." I watched the meaning of my words sink into him, watching his last hope of saving himself from his debts fall apart. He had not only done something terrible, he had done something terrible for nothing. "You hurt me for a piece of paper that means nothing to you," I finished, closing the folder. "You fought for something that was never there. Nothing here is yours except your debts." Robert let out a sound like a whimpering hurt animal. He covered his face with his hands and rocked back and forth, sitting on the floor of the city's dining room. He understood that he didn't lose tonight. He lost 10 years ago when he decided I was just something to be used. The moan that came from Robert's throat didn't sound human. It was the sound of a breaking rope, the sound of a building falling down. He looked at the blue folder like it was poison. His world, built on greed and the belief that weak people could be robbed with no consequences, fell apart into a single dark point. Suddenly he moved, but not to attack. All his bossiness, all his fake importance disappeared, leaving only sticky animal fear. Robert slid completely off his spot on the floor, turning into a shapeless pile of expensive clothes and sweaty body. He crawled toward me on his hands and knees like a beaten dog that knows its owner has picked up a stick. He grabbed at the legs of my chair. His fingers slipped on the wood, leaving wet marks. He tried to reach the bottom of my dress to kiss it, but I pulled my feet away in disgust. "Mrs. Johnson, Grandma," he whimpered, and tears mixed with snot ran down his red face. "Forgive me, for God's sake. Forgive me. I didn't know. I truly didn't know. It's all the stress. It's the job. You know what kind of job I have." He raised his eyes to me, full of terror. "They'll kill me, Grandma," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Those people I owe money to. If I don't pay them tomorrow, they'll hurt me badly. I don't have the money. I hoped Grandma save me. Ask Mayor Thompson. Let him give me more time. Let him help. I'll work it all off. I'll do anything." It was disgusting. The man who an hour ago called me a useless old woman and laughed at my pain was now groveling at my feet, ready to lick my shoes. I looked at the top of his head, his thin hair wet with sweat, and felt nothing but sickness. The anger was gone. Only disgust remained, like I had stepped in garbage. "It wasn't me," he suddenly screamed, trying to find an excuse. "It was all her. It was Emma." He pointed a finger back toward his wife without turning. "She kept pushing me. She said, 'The mother's old. She doesn't need the house. Let's sell it. Let's get the money.' She wanted money for a new car. I just wanted peace in the family. Grandma, believe me." Something clinked in the room. Emma had dropped her spoon. I shifted my gaze to my daughter. She sat white as snow, holding her hands to her chest. Hearing her husband's words, seeing how this sinking boat was trying to drag her down with it, she changed. The fear in her eyes was replaced by the fury of a trapped rat. She jumped from her chair, knocking it over with a crash. "What are you saying, you liar?" she screamed, her voice breaking into a high squeal. "How dare you? You forced me. You." Emma rushed toward me, pushing the air aside with her hands like someone swimming. She fell to her knees next to Robert, pushing him away with her shoulder, trying to get closer to me, closer to the source of forgiveness. "Mama, don't listen to him," she babbled, grabbing my good arm. Her hands were cold and wet. "He's a monster. He's a bully. I was afraid of him. He hit me too, not just you. He threatened me. I wanted to call the ambulance, Mommy. I swear." She sobbed, smearing makeup down her cheeks, turning into a horrible mask of fake sadness. "I'm your daughter, Mama. Your own blood. Love you. Save me from him. Tell Mayor Thompson I'm a victim too." I looked at both of them. Two creatures crawling at my feet. One was a stranger who just wanted money. The other was the one I carried in my belly, the one I nursed, whose scraped knees I kissed when she was little. How did this happen? At what point did my little girl, my Emma, turn into this? I carefully but firmly pulled my hand out of her grabbing fingers. The pain in the broken bone beat like a drum, reminding me of reality, keeping me from being too soft. "Emma," I said quietly. She froze with hope, watching my mouth, waiting for forgiveness, expecting a mother's heart to melt. "You're lying," I stated. A flash of confusion crossed her eyes. "Mama, You didn't want to call a doctor," I interrupted her, and my voice sounded sharper than a knife cutting through paper. I remember every minute of that night. I was lying on the floor in the hall. I was crying in pain. Robert was in the kitchen drinking water. "And you?" I leaned closer to her, looking directly into her wide eyes. "You stood over me. You weren't crying. You leaned down and said in my face, 'Be quiet, you stupid old woman. Be quiet. The neighbors will hear. You're embarrassing us.'" Emma flinched like I had hit her. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Red shame didn't color her face. She became even whiter. She understood that I remembered. That I was awake. That the witness to her betrayal was not some distant god, but me. "You weren't afraid for me," I continued without mercy. "You were afraid of trouble. You were afraid the neighbors would call the police, and that would hurt Robert's career and your comfortable life. You chose comfort, Emma, not your mother. She lowered her head. She had nothing to say. In that moment, a short, sharp buzz sounded across the smooth surface of the table. Everyone jumped except for Mayor Thompson. The mayor calmly took his phone from the inside pocket of his jacket. The screen glowed with a cool blue light reflected in his emotionless eyes. He swiped his finger across the screen, reading a message. The corner of his mouth moved slightly up, but it wasn't a smile of happiness. It was the smile of a doctor who has confirmed a bad diagnosis. The investigation works fast, he said dryly, not lifting his eyes from the screen. In our time, electronic tracks are harder to erase than footprints. He slowly placed the phone on the table and looked at Robert, who had fallen silent, sensing the approach of doom. It turns out, Robert, your money problems are just the beginning. The mayor's voice sounded almost bored, but in that boredom was danger. My people didn't just check your bank accounts. They checked the buildings under your control at work, including the storage room of this very building. A building that is a protected historical landmark. Robert stopped breathing. His eyes bulged out. It seemed the mention of the storage room scared him more than my broken arm. Interesting case, James continued, tapping his finger on the table. According to the papers, it's a space for keeping cleaning supplies. But in fact, my people are down there right now. They say there are so many boxes of stolen goods. You could open a small illegal store. Fake designer bags, untaxed alcohol, smuggled electronics, Robert. The mayor shook his head like a disappointed teacher. You didn't just hurt a veteran teacher. You used the storage room of the building where the woman who changed my lives as a warehouse for your criminal business. You turned her home into a den of thieves. James raised his gaze to his security chief. The captain nodded. He didn't need more instructions. 2 bodyguards stepped forward. They moved together like parts of one machine. Robert didn't even have time to scream. Strong hands in dark gloves grabbed him up from his knees. He tried to squirm, but he was held so professionally and firmly that you could hear his joints crack. No, Mayor Thompson. Let's make a deal, Robert wailed, twisting in the iron grip. I'll tell you everything. I'll give you the names of everyone involved. Don't. Remove this trash, the governor said quietly, turning away to the window. The bodyguards dragged Robert toward the exit. They didn't use gentleness. His feet scraped the floor, kicking up the corners of the tablecloth. He screamed, begged, and threatened, but his cries were just noise that faded away. The door to the hall was open. The same door he had proudly thrown open 10 minutes ago, expecting to see his helper. Now he was being dragged through it like the criminal he had always been, only before his suit had hidden it. Emma, do something, came his last cry from the hall. Then the front door slammed shut. The heavy wooden door. The sound was final, like a judge's hammer hitting wood. The house was silent again. But it was no longer the heavy, sticky silence that had lived here for the last few years. It was a clean, cool silence. The kind found in a classroom after a long, hard day of teaching. When the lights dim and the students go home. A lesson was taught. The worst was over. James's assistants worked quickly and silently. While we spoke, they cleared the dirty dishes, the remains of the half-eaten food, and the spilled water from the table. The windows were thrown open wide, letting in the fresh night air, clearing out the smell of stale fear and Robert's cheap cologne. We were left alone, me and the boy I had once taught, now a white-haired man carrying the weight of an entire town on his shoulders. We sat at a clean table. Before us were only 2 thin cups, from which steam rose, and a small plate with thinly sliced cookies. The tea was strong, real dark-colored. My right arm in its bandages lay in my lap. The pain medicine was starting to wear off, and the dull, beating ache returned, reminding me of the price I had paid for this evening. But this pain was different. It was the pain of healing, not the pain of being destroyed. I felt incredibly light, like a heavy coat I had worn for years had been lifted from my shoulders. James took a sip of tea and looked at me over the cup. Mrs. Johnson, he asked softly, is there anything you need? Can send a nurse. I can arrange a move to the best room in the regional hospital. Money, medicine, protection. Just say the word. I looked at him. In his eyes, I saw a real willingness to turn the world upside down for me. But I didn't need the world. I needed to feel like myself again. I looked at the center of the table. There, on a small plate, sat the only untouched item from that awful feast. Piece of chocolate cake, layered, covered with frosting. Stood like a small treasure. Next to it lay a silver fork. "Only one thing, James," I said, smiling truly for the first time that evening. The mayor tensed, ready to do anything I asked. "The fork," I said. He blinked, clearly confused. "The fork," he repeated, looking around the table. "Should I get you the silverware? I'll call someone now." "No." I shook my head. "Just slide it closer to me." James, still not understanding, carefully moved the plate with the cake and the fork closer to my side of the table. I looked at my right arm, wrapped in bandages, useless still. The same one Robert had laughed at, calling me a helpless old woman who couldn't even feed herself. Slowly, deliberately, I raised my left hand. My non-dominant hand. My fingers shook slightly, a sign of age and the stress I'd been through. But I forced them to obey. I picked up the silver fork. It sat in my palm, awkwardly, uncomfortably, but firmly. "Robert said I couldn't hold it," I said quietly, looking at the shine of the silver. "That I was helpless. That without him I would starve to death in front of a full plate." I looked at James. I need to prove him wrong. Even if he can't see it, I need to prove it to myself. I lowered the fork to the cake with my left hand. Clumsily but with determination. I broke off a piece, brought it to my mouth. The frosting was sweet. The cake melted on my tongue. It was the most delicious cake of my life because I was eating it myself in my home at my table without fear. "I am not helpless, James," I said, swallowing the bite and feeling strength return to me. "I am a teacher. I was just waiting for the right time to teach the final lesson." I set the fork down and looked into the dark window where the lights of the big town burned. Sometimes for the body to survive, the diseased part must be cut away, even if it hurts, even if it's part of the family. I was just waiting for the right helper to remove the infection. Mayor Thompson silently covered my good hand with his hand. We drank tea, and my father's clock ticked off the time of my new, free life. Tick-tock, tick-tock. My dear listeners, that is the end of Mrs. Margaret Johnson's story. A story about how long a strong woman can endure, and how powerful justice can be when patience finally runs out. I know many of you have mixed feelings right now. Some will say they deserved it. They got what they earned. And others might think, was it too harsh? After all, Emma is her daughter, her own child. Is it right to cut off your own child, to hand your son-in-law over to the law? This is the eternal question. Where does family duty end and the right to your own dignity begin? Does a parent have the right to separate from children if those children turn into parasites who threaten their very life? I, Margaret, made my choice. Chose life. How would you have acted in my place? Could you forgive Emma? Let me know in the comments. Your opinion truly matters to me. And be sure to tell us which city or country you're listening from. The geography of our stories is truly amazing. If this story touched you, if it made your heart beat faster, please support our channel by hitting the like button, subscribing, and clicking the bell to make sure you don't miss new stories. Your support is what inspires us to create. Remember, my friends, that dignity is not about age. It's not about how strong your body is. Dignity is about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone take it away. Margaret Johnson, at 73 years old, with a broken arm and an empty stomach, taught us that lesson. She showed us that being weak on the outside doesn't mean being weak on the inside. She showed us that patience is not the same as surrender. And she showed us that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we love most. But loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. Take care of yourselves, protect your dignity, and never forget that you deserve respect no matter your age, no matter your circumstances. If you're in a situation like Margaret's, remember, there is always hope. There are always people who will stand up for what's right. Sometimes you just need to reach out and ask for help. Don't suffer in silence. Don't let fear keep you trapped. Margaret waited for the right moment, and when it came, she was ready. Be ready to keep your important papers safe. Know your rights. Remember who your real friends are. And never, ever let anyone convince you that you're worthless just because you're getting older. Age brings wisdom. Age brings experience. And sometimes, age brings the perfect moment for justice. Thank you for listening to Jamal's stories. We bring you these tales not just to entertain, but to inspire, to educate, and to remind you of your own strength. Every story we share carries a message. Every character teaches a lesson. And every ending, whether happy or sad, shows us something true about the human spirit. Margaret's story reminds us that silence is not always weakness. Sometimes silence is strategy. Sometimes waiting is not giving up. Sometimes waiting is preparing. And sometimes the people who seem the most helpless are actually the most powerful, because they've lived long enough to know how the world really works. They've seen enough to understand that justice doesn't always come quickly, but it does come. Eventually, truth wins. Eventually, the mask falls off. Eventually, those who do wrong face the consequences of their actions. Robert thought he was smart. He thought he had all the power because he had money, a job, and connections. But he forgot one simple truth. Real power doesn't come from fear. Real power comes from respect. And when you lose respect, you lose everything. Emma thought she could choose her husband over her mother and face no consequences. She thought family loyalty only went one direction, from parent to child, never from child to parent. But she learned the hard way that relationships are a two-way street. You can't expect love and support from someone you've betrayed. You can't expect forgiveness from someone whose arm you let get broken while you stood by and did nothing. Some wounds heal. Some wounds don't. And sometimes the decision not to forgive is the healthiest decision you can make. Forgiveness is beautiful when it's deserved. But forgiveness without change, forgiveness without repentance, forgiveness without justice, that's not forgiveness. That's just letting people keep hurting you. Margaret understood this. She didn't forgive because Emma and Robert weren't sorry. They were only sorry they got caught. They were only sorry they lost. If the mayor hadn't shown up, if the investigation hadn't happened, they would have kept hurting her. They would have kept stealing from her. They would have kept treating her like garbage. So Margaret did what she had to do. She protected herself. She chose life. She chose dignity. And in doing so, she became a hero. Not the kind of hero who wears a cape or fights with swords, but the kind of hero who survives, who endures, who waits for justice, and who finally gets it. Before we end, I want to share one more thought with you. Many of you listening are young. You might think this story doesn't apply to you. You might think, I would never treat my parents that way. I would never hurt an old person. But life has a way of testing us. Life has a way of putting us in situations we never expected. Stress comes. Money problems come. Fear comes. And when those things come, they reveal who we really are. Emma probably didn't plan to become the kind of daughter who watches her mother suffer. Robert probably didn't plan to become the kind of man who breaks an old woman's arm. But step by step, choice by choice, excuse by excuse, they became those people. So my challenge to you today is this. Decide now what kind of person you will be. Decide now that you will never let circumstances turn you into someone cruel. Decide now that you will treat the elderly with respect, honor, and kindness. Because one day, if you're lucky, you will be old too. And the world you create today is the world you will live in tomorrow. Treat others the way you want to be treated when you're vulnerable, when you're weak, when you need help. That's the golden rule. That's the law that never changes. That's the principle that makes civilization possible. Margaret's story is not just about one old woman and her terrible family. It's about all of us. It's about the choices we make every single day. It's about whether we choose kindness or cruelty, patience or violence, respect or contempt. Every day we make these choices. Every day we decide what kind of person we will be. And every day those choices add up, creating the story of our lives. What story are you creating? What will people say about you when you're gone? Will they remember you as someone who lifted others up, or as someone who pushed them down? Will they remember you as someone who protected the weak, or as someone who exploited them? Will they remember you as someone who stood for justice, or as someone who only cared about themselves? These questions matter. These questions determine not just how we're remembered, but who we actually are. So as you go about your day today, remember Margaret. Remember her patience. Remember her wisdom. Remember her dignity. And remember that age does not determine worth. Weakness does not determine value. And those who seem to have no power sometimes have the most power of all, because they have truth on their side. Truth is more powerful than money. Truth is more powerful than position. Truth is more powerful than physical strength. Truth is the ultimate power because truth lasts forever. Lies fall apart. Deception crumbles. Cruelty backfires. But truth stands. Truth endures. Truth wins. That's what this story teaches us. That's what Margaret's life shows us. And that's what I want you to remember long after you finish listening to this video. Now, my dear friends, we've reached the end of our time together today. But before you go, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening. Your time is precious. Your attention is valuable. And the fact that you chose to spend nearly an hour listening to this story means the world to me and to everyone at Jamal's Stories. If you enjoyed this story, if it moved you, if it made you think, please show your support by clicking the like button below this video. That simple click helps us reach more people. It helps the algorithm show our stories to others who need to hear them. It helps us continue creating content that matters. And if you haven't already subscribed to Jamal's Stories, please do so now. Click that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We post regularly, bringing you tales of courage, justice, redemption, and truth. Every story is carefully crafted to not just entertain you, but to inspire you and teach you something valuable about life. In the comments below, I invite you to share your thoughts. Tell me, do you think Margaret made the right choice? Could you have forgiven Emma? What would you have done in Margaret's situation? And please tell us where you're listening from. Are you in the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, Nigeria, India, the Philippines? We have listeners all over the world, and it's always amazing to see how our stories connect people across continents, cultures, and languages. The human experience is universal. Pain is universal. Hope is universal. And justice is universal. No matter where you're from, you understand Margaret's story. No matter what language you speak, you feel her pain and celebrate her victory. That's the power of storytelling. That's why we do what we do at Jamal's Stories. We believe that stories have the power to change lives, to open minds, to heal hearts, and to bring people together. Thank you again for being part of our community. Thank you for listening, for caring, for thinking, and for sharing. You make this channel possible. You make this work meaningful. And you give us the motivation to keep creating, keep searching for stories, and keep sharing messages that matter. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Treat the elderly in your life with the respect they deserve. Stand up against cruelty wherever you see it. And never forget that you have more power than you think. Just like Margaret, you are stronger than you know. Just like Margaret, your moment will come. And when it does, be ready. Be patient. Be wise. And be brave. Until next time, this is Jamal's Stories, reminding you that every ending is also a beginning, and every story teaches us how to live better lives. God bless you all. Before you close this video, I want to leave you with one final thought. In the center of your screen right now, you'll see a window appear. Click on it to watch our other most gripping stories. We have tales of redemption, stories of revenge, accounts of justice, and narratives of triumph over adversity. Each one is carefully selected to touch your heart and challenge your mind. Don't let this be the last story you hear from us. Continue your journey with Jamal's Stories. Explore our library of powerful narratives. Find the stories that speak to your situation, that address your struggles, that celebrate your victories. We're here for you, creating content that matters, sharing stories that inspire, and building a community of people who believe in truth, justice, and human dignity. Click that window, watch another story, and let the lessons continue. Because life is one big story, And we're all in it together, learning from each other, supporting each other, and helping each other become the heroes of our own narratives. Thank you, dear friends. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And thank you for being part of the JAMAL'S Stories family. Until we meet again in the next story, stay strong, stay blessed, and remember, your dignity is worth fighting for. Goodbye for now, and may justice and peace follow you all the days of your life.